Ty Singh here, who is an author and producer. Ty, could you give us a bit of background on yourself, my man?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jeff. I'm Ty Singh. I'm the author of Born to Be Bad and Born to Be Bad Part 2, the imaginatively titled sequel to my first book. I was also a co-writer and producer on the documentary In Search of the Last Action Heroes, which if you're in the UK, you can watch on Amazon Prime right now.
How did you get involved with the documentary, The Last Action Heroes?
Oh, I asked to be involved. My first book, Born to Be Bad, had literally just come out. And for those of you unfamiliar with it, Born to Be Bad is a book where I interviewed the actors who played the greatest villains in action movies. So it was actors like Vernon Wells from Mad Max 2 and Commando, and Steven Berkoff from Rambo 2 and Beverly Hills Cop, and lots of the terrorists from Die Hard, and David Patrick Kelly from The Warriors. So the book had just come out, and I saw that Oliver Harper, the director, and producer Robin Block were just about to put this documentary into production. And I reached out to them and I was like, hey, if you're doing a documentary on 80s action films, I just interviewed a bunch of actors that I think might be a good fit. Are you looking for a researcher? And they got back very quickly and they were like, we've just looked your book up. You sound like you know your stuff. Do you want to come on board as like a co-writer and a producer? And we might send you out to LA to do all the interviews. And I was like, yep, I'm on board. What do you want me to do? And they sent me out to LA to do a whole lot of the interviews. Oliver did a bunch of the interviews in the UK. And I got sent out to LA to meet up with a lot of the actors that I'd interviewed for the book. And I got to meet them finally in person. People like Vernon Wells and Bill Duke and Al Leon and Stephen E. D'Souza, who had written Die Hard and Commando and The Running Man, and was kind enough to write the foreword for my first book. So it was incredible.
Man, that sounds amazing. Sure that, well, I hope anyway, the trip to LA was paid for.
Oh, all expenses paid, and I made sure to send in all my receipts.
You cannot go wrong with that. Yeah. And as for your book as well, Volume 2 is just released and people can purchase it on Amazon. Is that right?
They can purchase it on Amazon, but if you want to support your local bookshop and order it through that, that's all the better. I think your local bookshop probably pays their taxes, so support your local business. But yeah, it's on Amazon as well.
And then can we ask you, Ty, will there be a Volume 3?
There won't. I don't think. I got a lot of the actors that I really wanted for Part 2. I think if I was to do a Part 3, we might be scraping the barrel a bit. Off the top of my head, I can't think of many actors, enough actors to necessitate a Volume 3. So I think Volume 2, we might be 2 and done.
Yeah, I was thinking that as you were speaking, I can't think of any other villains that you have not interviewed.
There's a couple. There are the two that got away, and in their defense, they're very busy people. And so one is Clancy Brown, who has just been cast in John Wick 4, and the other is Michael Ironside, who doesn't really do interviews, and he suffered from cancer a few years ago, and I think he's kind of stepped back from acting, and he wants to look after his daughters. And to that, you can only say fair enough.
Yeah, exactly. Michael Ironside. I'll always know Michael Ironside as the voice of Sam Fisher.
Oh, in the Splinter Cell games.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, he's always going to be Jester in the Top Gun and Richter in Total Recall. Just something about that man's face. It's a delight to watch. And
the voice.
The voice. There's a reason he does so many voiceover roles, like Sam Fisher. I would love to have spoken to him, but hey, it wasn't to be. And there were so many great names I did get to speak to, like Robert Patrick and Kim Coates and Tony Todd, that you can only be upset for so long.
So guys, if you're listening or watching, he's name dropped a couple of the villains that he has spoke with. I think it's time to invest the pennies into his book, and maybe we can get a volume, like a side quote. The guys who were meant to be bad but just didn't quite make it.
It would be a very short book, but it's a good idea.
Yeah, people get off on these days in short books. So a couple of
A
short
novella.
stories.
Yeah. Short little, flick book.
So today, Ty, I have you on here to discuss the Lethal Weapon franchise. And I think Lethal Weapon, even though everyone says 48 Hours cemented the buddy cop genre, Lethal Weapon made it a pillar. It went that step further. What are your thoughts on the franchise itself?
I mean, it was a bit of a game changer, to be fair, and also just the gall of someone so young like Shane Black. I mean, how old was he when he sold that first script of Lethal Weapon? 21, maybe, if that. It was outrageous, and just following it up with films like The Long Kiss Goodnight and The Last Boy Scout. There's a reason his scripts are famed for its peppy dialogue, and I know that Lethal Weapon 2 did not follow how he would have wanted it to go. I think in his script, Riggs does die at the end, but and this is just between you and me here, Jeff, and obviously the listeners. I think Lethal Weapon 2 is better than Lethal Weapon 1. I don't know where we stand in ranking the Lethal Weapon films, but I think I saw Lethal Weapon 2 before I saw the first one, and the evil South African ambassador and diplomatic immunity, and I think all of that, and just kind of like the plethora of supporting characters that you have. You have Jeanette Goldstein and Hank from Breaking Bad as part of their little task force of cops that are blown up. I really love Lethal Weapon 2, but you are right in how Lethal Weapon 1 did just completely change the landscape. It could be because I interviewed Derek O'Connor for Born to Be Bad 1, who plays Peter Vorsted, the guy that kills Riggs' wife. He died a few years ago, but he was a delight, and he did not give any shits about pissing off South Africans. He was like, they're awful. They were awful what they were doing with apartheid. So I was more than happy to stick the knife in.
Well, before we go on and speak about your favorite part 2, we'll start off with Lethal Weapon, the original Lethal Weapon, which stands as a highlight because you got Crazy Riggs versus Crazy Busey at the end. What were your thoughts on the first Lethal Weapon?
It's really, once you see the sequels, you're kind of surprised at how dark Lethal Weapon 1 is. Especially, there is a director's cut where you see Riggs try to shoot himself and he can't do it. I think that's in the director's cut, and where he's picking up a prostitute, not for sex, but purely because he wants someone to sit with him while he watches the Three Stooges. And it's really heartbreaking stuff. And it doesn't go so much on the out-and-out comedy as the sequels tend to do. And I think when Joe Pesci comes into it as Leo Getz. But saying that, the bad guys... Gary Busey is a force unto himself, so he's great as Mr. Joshua. And there's Edo Ross there, and oh god, who's the actor that plays the Colonel? Mitchell Ryan, who I mainly know for being Commander Riker's dad in Star Trek: The Next Generation. I don't think they ever reached the level of the bad guys in Lethal Weapon 2, and that sequel does kind of go bigger in many ways. But there is something really enjoyable about the stripped down nature of Lethal Weapon. But there's always that kind of one thing. And I don't know if it ever kind of occurs to you. Whenever I watch the first one, Rianne's date is shot in the face and left. Murtaugh's daughter's out on a date, and they know that Rianne's been kidnapped when they kind of get a call from the police that someone's been found shot. And it matches the description of Rianne's date. And no one seems to give a shit about that kid. Not even Rianne at the end. She's like, was my date okay? No, nothing. That poor kid with the dimples, he just shot on the side of the road, probably by Mr. Joshua, and no one cares.
It would be no other than Busey. Like,
It would have been Busey. Creepy Busey. And Al Leon. Al Leon is also in the first one, isn't he?
he was in every movie in the 80s, though.
And also in my book. But yeah, Al Leon, rent an Asian henchman with his long hair, that Fu Manchu mustache, torturing Martin Riggs. And, he was in everything from Die Hard to Big Trouble in Little China to fighting Brandon Lee in Rapid Fire. That man is a staple of classic 80s action films.
Do you think that some of the deleted scenes for Lethal Weapon are some of the best scenes?
I think they really do enhance the story, and I think in my box set they are included in the actual main feature. I'm trying to think. There are deleted scenes for Lethal Weapon 2, but I don't think any of them are as strong as the ones from Lethal Weapon 1. So I would say that if you do have the choice between watching the theatrical cut and the director's cut is the better version of the film. How about you? Where do you stand on it?
The scene at the school sort of sells me on Riggs straight away.
The crazy sniper.
Yeah. Riggs, I think, in the first two installments anyway, he's not balanced, and he's got that edge to him, which does make him the title of the movie, A Lethal Weapon, which I think is something that they should really have kept going throughout.
I agree, but after maybe for the first two films it works, but then you've got this Lethal Weapon who spends a lot of time with the Murtaugh family, and they do soften the edges on him. And I really do love Rene Russo as Lorna Cole coming into the third one. I think Rene Russo is great. I wish she had been in more stuff. I really like her when she comes into the franchise. Lethal Weapon 4 isn't the strongest installment, and I don't think that's controversial, but I really love everything Rene Russo does in the films. I think she's great. I always love her when she shows up and stuff.
What would your favorite scene be in Lethal Weapon, or the first installment?
Oh, the first installment. I always think of like the handcuff scene where they're Riggs and Murtaugh, they're out getting to know each other, and they respond to a suicide jumper. And there's the guy on the edge of the building. He's going to jump, and Riggs is suicidal and essentially dares him to do it so much that he then handcuffs himself to the jumper and takes him off the building with him. And there's a big inflatable thing underneath. And it kind of, that's the scene where Murtaugh's like, oh, this guy is fucking crazy. And I'm a few days from retirement. This is the worst thing that's ever going to happen to me this Christmas.
The acting as well. I must touch upon the acting. The acting, I think, throughout the whole franchise is on par. There's not one of the cast are phoning in a performance. You can actually tell they get on and they like the job they're doing. You know, it's not like they're just showing up on set, saying a couple of lines and going.
I also like the background actors, well, more like the supporting cast, so like Mary Ellen Trainor, who plays Dr. Stephanie Woods, and she's there throughout the franchise. And also Steve Kahan, but he's Richard Donner's cousin. He's their captain. The guy that looks essentially just like Richard Donner, and he's there throughout. And, you know, Darlene Love as Murtaugh's wife. I just love the supporting cast. It's one of those films that's really enhanced by the background and supporting cast, especially people like Darlene Love. I mean, she is best known as like a singer, being in the Blossoms and belting out that Christmas song. But she's great as an actress, man. I love it. I love a bit of Darlene Love.
I know, you see at Christmas.
It's just every Christmas, her belting out that Christmas number. It's wonderful. If anything, it underlines the fact that Lethal Weapon is a Christmas film.
Exactly.
Darlene Love's in it. How can it not be a Christmas film?
And going on to the second installment, which ups the ante, and the fact that Riggs and Murtaugh have got to know each other now, and they've got like a solid brotherhood going on, which makes, as you said, Lethal Weapon 2 that bit more better because they know each other. The first scene, if I remember correctly, there's a car chase and Riggs just bolts out the car on foot.
Yeah.
That scene gets me every time when Murtaugh pulls up to him and says, "Get your slow ass in the car, Riggs."
I mean, it is the film where it goes bigger, from everything from the opening car chase to Riggs pulling down the house on stilts, and then the shootout on the boat at the end. But in terms of scenes that are the most memorable, it's also quote unquote the quieter scenes, and that is where Murtaugh is sat on the toilet that's going to explode, and the bomb disposal team leave, and Riggs won't leave Murtaugh. He's like, "No, I'm going to stay. I'm going to help him. I'm going to pull him into the bath." And it is that quiet moment between the two characters that I think stands out. I mean, sure, it ends with like the toilet flying out the window and landing on a cop car. But before that, the real strength of that scene centers on the, like I said, the brotherhood between those two characters, and they're not going to leave each other's side. And it's kind of reversed at the end, where Riggs is being shot repeatedly and by all accounts should die, and Murtaugh's not going to leave him. But, they needed to make a Lethal Weapon 3.
I found that end scene it was very powerful. Like, it hits the chords. It definitely hits the chords because you genuinely worried.
Yeah. And, I mean, it kind of makes sense thematically that Riggs goes down killing the guy that killed his wife. Pete has the crate dropped on him, but then he's shot at the end by the main South African diplomat, the evil guy from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I've forgotten what his name is now. But yeah, I mean, thematically, it makes sense that he dies, but obviously it's Hollywood. You got to keep making that money. So I totally get where Shane Black's coming from. And I don't know if you watched the Lethal Weapon TV series. I didn't. But I know Riggs did die in that, but because of the actor's bad behavior and apparently just being a dick on set. So I wonder did that play well amongst the fans of people that watched it? Was Riggs dying emotionally satisfying, or was it just because of the events surrounding him dying, where they're like, "Oh, they got to write him out somehow"? So,
I seen the clip for it on YouTube, and it was sort of you can tell it was just a shot at the actor, it literally was a shot at the actor. He's sitting at his wife's grave and he gets shot in the chest.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and I was like, and then Murtaugh gets the call over the radio, U-turns it and belts on, and that was it. He's replaced by Sean William Scott.
Yeah. Similarly, do you watch The Expanse, Jeff?
I don't know. Is it good?
It's great, but similarly, one of the main characters on that was also accused of sexual harassment. Well, I know the guy in Lethal Weapon was just accused of being a dick and being difficult, but a cast member of The Expanse was accused of sexual harassment and sexual assault. And they wrote his character out by basically, there's one scene, he's like, the character's doing something heroic, piloting the ship fast, cut to, he's just had an aneurysm. It's just bleeding from his nose, and it's clearly too much for him, and he died. So you're like, what? It's so glaring, and then you're like, that was really weird, and then you read up on it, and you're like, oh.
They just booted him, and they got him out the quickest way possible.
It's like, how can we write him out? He just had an aneurysm. Blood vessel just burst.
Fighting at the same time, I have to admit.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, no, Lethal Weapon 2, I think if I was ranking them, I think it may not be the better film on paper, but I think it's the most enjoyable. It's where Riggs and Murtaugh, they're in their groove. They have that kind of banter that you know and love. You've got a nice boo hiss bad guy, and you've just got the action sequences, and I think it just all kind of works into a much more comfortable film. Everyone is in their stride. The director, the cast, everything.
And we get to see Riggs pull down a house with his pickup truck.
Exactly. And you know that he's got an escape hatch under his trailer for his dog as well. You've got Patsy Kensit doing a very questionable South African accent. What more do you need?
Exactly. It has everything you can need.
Hmm.
And then Riggs survives as we move on to Lethal Weapon 3.
Well, it's because he was not shot with the armor-piercing bullets of Lethal Weapon 3. If he had, he would be dead. Yeah, Lethal Weapon 3. This suffers from something that I like to call the gangs all here syndrome, where, Leo Getz was a great character in Lethal Weapon 2. Did you need him to bring him back for Lethal Weapon 3 and Lethal Weapon 4? You didn't. No. He doesn't really need to be there. I like the fact Lorna Cole's there from Internal Affairs, because it's all about corrupt cops stealing tech. I like Stuart Wilson as the bad guy. I've liked him. I mean, he's in, was it No Escape with Ray Liotta? And he's great in The Mask of Zorro. And I think he was in Hot Fuzz as well, as one of the village elders. I tried to get an interview with him for one of my books, but apparently he's retired, just lives out in a ranch in Montana. So for a British actor, he's just out under the big sky state.
And that would be Born to be Bad, volumes 1 and 2 for
out now. BornToBeBad.co.uk. Check your local bookstore.
I can see from the comments as well here. We've got a comment from Colin, who I'm sure you know as well from Twitter.
Oh, absolutely.
He said that Ao Leong is a legend and that the handcuff scene is memorable.
Ao Leong is great, and some of your readers and listeners might not be aware, but a few years ago, he had a stroke, and he's actually paralyzed down the left-hand side of his body. And for someone who's so active, he was a big motocross rider, loves his bikes, loved playing guitar, as well as, doing martial arts. It's been quite difficult for him, and it's kind of given him memory issues. So when I was interviewing him, every now and then he'll be telling a story about what it's like working with, Mel Gibson on Lethal Weapon or Bruce Willis. And then there are just holes in his memory. And it's crazy. And I met him in person, and he's so funny and he's so talkative, but he does now have problems moving. And from, someone who you just see doing backflips in, Big Trouble in Little China and just doing all this crazy stunt work through his career, I think the last few years have really been hard on him, but he's written a book that I've got, and there's a good documentary called Henchman that's basically all about his life. So if any of your listeners are really interested in the story of Ao Leong, you can definitely check out Henchman, and it's worth watching.
And Colin as well, Born to be Bad, volume 1 and 2. We're going to sell many copies of this book today, Ty.
Oh, God, I hope so. I mean, I'm constantly shilling it. I'm the worst.
So, Lethal Weapon 3.
Lethal Weapon 3. I really enjoy Lethal Weapon 3. I think it's, when people talk about the Lethal Weapon franchise, I think they kind of talk about what is regarded as the low point of Lethal Weapon 4 and the high points of 1 and 2. And I think Lethal Weapon 3 often kind of gets left out of the conversation. But I think it's a really enjoyable film. I'm not sure it kind of gets back to the highs of its opening sequence, which is kind of like where they're defusing a bomb in an underground car park, and they literally start the film by just demolishing an entire building. And I think once you open with that, it's kind of like Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. It just starts off the film just holding on to the side of a plane. You're like, well, where'd you go after that? And that is a great film, but that's how they start the film, and you're kind of like, wow, that is a hell of a an opening gambit. So yeah, I really do like Lethal Weapon 3, and I feel it should get talked about more often.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. People talk Lethal Weapon 1 and 2, then they're like, oh, do you see the one with Jet Li?
Yeah, and they kind of skip over 3. I think maybe Stuart Wilson just isn't like a big enough name. And often in the action film community, unfortunately, not many people go, let's just talk about Rene Russo. Isn't she great? And I love Rene Russo. Thomas Crown Affair, one of the best remakes of a film ever done. Better than the Steve McQueen, Faye Dunaway original, in my humble opinion. I think she's great.
I always, she has a presence around her on screen. Like, it should be one of them actresses you never sort of turn your head at. Do you know what I mean? Like you'd never be like, oh, she's on TV, let's flick this over.
Yeah.
But she's young, so she always manages to captivate you.
I was kind of annoyed with the Marvel films about how little they used her in the Thor films. And then when they brought her back for Thor Endgame and she had that big scene with Thor and, you know, she had died, but, you know, he's talking to his mum and it's, you know, arguably one of the most emotional scenes. I was like, oh, thank God they brought Rene Russo back, man. She got more to do in Endgame than she did in the previous, like, all the rest of the Thor films that she was in. So, yeah, I'm glad they took advantage of having a Rene Russo in your film. And I feel not enough, you know, films do that. I think she's great. I think she's a very underrated actress of her period.
And then another highlight I found of Lethal Weapon 3 was after Murtaugh accidentally shoots the kid, and then he sort of just takes himself off. The way like Danny sort of handles himself in them scenes, I think, is one of the highlights of the franchise. Like each movie does highlight Gibson and Glover's acting abilities.
Yeah, that, you know, Daryl shouldn't have had a gun and he was shooting and he got caught up with the wrong crowd. It's one of those scenes. Daryl had a gun and someone was firing it, but the fact that they're just firing blindly into a building without like identifying who they're shooting at, and I know someone's kind of shooting at them, but they don't know who's in there and what's going on, and they're just kind of firing through the door. It's always that kind of, Murtaugh should be upset with himself. They're trained police officers, and I know the whole thing in America when it comes to trained police officers is a fucking loose term in terms of how they conduct themselves. But, you know, these are Hollywood movie police officers. They probably shouldn't be shooting blindly through a door, not knowing who's in there. So, but it's a good scene. It's really good.
And then I think it concludes with him drinking on a boat, which then he accuses Riggs of sleeping with his daughter. That
is a joke that kind of runs through at least the first three films that Riggs or Rihanna's interested in Riggs and Riggs might be interested in her. And it's like, it never really plays. Sure, in the first one, you can see a young teenage girl might be attracted to a sexy, ruggedly handsome Mel Gibson. By the second one, when she's like a model appearing in condom commercials, it's just weird that Murtaugh's that defensive of his daughter. It's just like comes over as overbearing. And by the third one, you're like, dude, you've got some serious issues now. And it's still going on in the fourth one that he's so protective of his daughter that her fiance is afraid to kind of make himself known as his fiance. It's just like, mate, come on, you need to be more chill as the family man here. This is not a healthy relationship you have with your daughter. And granted, you've put her life in danger multiple times.
Yeah, especially the first one. The first one. And his whole family at that, I'm pretty sure they all get sort of a gun pointed at them or captured in each installment.
Well, their house is blown up in the second one. A car's driven through the front of it in the first one. The scene with the nail gun, that's the second one, isn't it? Or is the third one when they're having the renovations done?
Yes, that's the
third one. Yeah, because they're rebuilding it. Yeah, people are always invading their home. And again, in the fourth one, when the triads come in. So, yeah, I mean, I would change addresses and definitely consider putting your family every now and then into some sort of safe house. He's very cavalier with the safety of his family. I'm amazed he hasn't just lost more family members throughout.
I know. It just seems to be side characters. He just gets killed off, but his family seem to have quite a few lives.
They're fine. His entire team in Lethal Weapon 2 wiped out. But his family seems fine. Yeah.
As long as he stayed on that shitter, he was good. Like.
So where do you stand then with Lethal Weapon 4? The introduction of Jet Li, that time in Hollywood where they're like, hey, you know what's great? Hong Kong cinema. Let's get some of that magic over here.
I'm not gonna lie, Lethal Weapon 4. I love the opening. The opening, I thought, yeah, it's classic. You know, where it's like, let's will him not to turn around, and then
Oh, with the guy with the flamethrower, and
and the machine gun. Yeah, I love that. There's one bit I always love, and I don't know if anyone else has spotted this, but when they get to the guy with the flamethrower, they skid and get out the car. As they get out the car, I don't know if it's meant to be in the movie because it looks terrible. But Mel Gibson, sorry, not Mel Gibson, Danny Glover shoots his gun like 3 times at the side of the car, and I'm like, was that meant to be in there? Because they're just little blue flashes that go off, and I'm like, did he accidentally shoot his gun at the side of the car? But no one's clicked on to that. See, next time you're watching it, just watch as soon as they get out the car at the beginning.
he just fires his gun into
Fires
the
3
car.
shots, like rapid succession at the side of the car. It always gets me.
This is why Murtaugh should have retired a good few years ago. The man's now a goddamn liability.
That's paperwork right there.
It's a really unique time in Hollywood because obviously John Woo had come over and done Broken Arrow and Face Off at that point, and Chow Yun-fat had somewhat limited success with the Replacement Killers and The Corruptor, which I actually really like. The Corruptor, I feel that's a really underrated film.
Me too. One of Mark Wahlberg's best.
Yeah, and then Jet Li's career in Hollywood is fascinating. It's 1998, so it's the same year as Rush Hour, I think. And I feel Hollywood never knew what to do with him. He was always the man of very few words, even in films like Danny the Dog, or whatever it was called in whatever thing. Unleashed. The one, Romeo Must Die, he speaks very infrequently.
Yeah.
And it's very weird because you don't have a Romeo and Juliet film and not have Romeo talk very little. And I like Romeo Must Die. It's very enjoyable, but it was always where I felt Jet Li was very underserved by the films he was put in. Chow Yun-fat, I thought, made some good films, but they were just very similar, and stuff like Bulletproof Monk wasn't that great. And he was like wasting the Pirates of the Caribbean films. Jackie Chan made a couple of good films, mainly the first Rush Hour and Shanghai Noon, and then stuff like The Medallion and The Tuxedo and The Spy Next Door weren't great. And it's kind of like just the old story of Hollywood doesn't know what to do with Asian superstars. Okay. And it makes me kind of very happy that the likes of, well, until, Shang-Chi, Tony Leung's never really done a Western film. And even big Bollywood stars like Shah Rukh Khan and Amir Khan, all these big Indian film stars, they've kind of like gone, I don't need to go to Hollywood. They wouldn't know what to do with me. And, I would be a stranger in a land where here I am a god. Like Shah Rukh Khan is arguably the biggest star in the world compared to someone like George Clooney. Shah Rukh Khan doesn't need to go to Hollywood. So it's always amazing to me that somehow when these Asian film stars feel they need to go to Hollywood, because I don't think Jet Li needed to.
No, definitely. No, none of them needed to. Like Jackie didn't.
I know for Jackie, it was like a lifelong thing that he after The Protector and Battle Creek Brawl, he wanted to break America. And, Bruce Lee wanted to break America. But I don't think for Jet Li and Chow Yun-fat, they needed to. And I think the filmmakers that they got served with didn't know what to do with them because, you hear about how people like Quentin Tarantino loves like John Woo films, and I'm still not 100% sure Quentin Tarantino would have known what to do with Chow Yun-fat. But you hear about all these stories about how difficult it was for John Woo to make a film in the Hollywood system. Hard Target is very definitely a John Woo film, but by all accounts, it was a ball ache for him to make, and he was constantly clashing with the studios. Same with Face Off and Broken Arrow. It's just like constantly, it's like, if you get John Woo, let him make a John Woo film.
Yeah.
Stop trying to constrain him, for better or worse. You know, and that's the same with Mission Impossible 2. It's like, you wanted a John Woo Mission Impossible film. You have got a John Woo Mission Impossible film, whether you wanted that or not. So yeah, it's the same with Jet Li in Lethal Weapon 4. It's like, you've got Jet Li here. Stop putting him up against two actors that are like 30 years older than him.
Yeah, like what film was it? The one with Jason Statham in?
The One or War?
War. That was it. Like, that was just throwing them two together for the sake of it. There was nothing really to it. And I've even read that Jet Li hates the film.
It's kind of like the Expendables films, and the Jet Li fight versus Dolph Lundgren is fine, but I've spoken to Scott Adkins several times, and he said that when him and Jason Statham were doing their fight, they had like half a day to do it, because most of the production were shooting Djokovic's cameo, and that was even cut from the final thing of the film. But they were concentrating on that, and they had like half a day to do their fight. And it's like, Scott Adkins versus Jason Statham. Put some fucking effort into it.
Yeah, that could have been such a bigger and better fight.
Yeah, it's weird. It's very weird that these films go to all this effort to kind of get this talent involved and then kind of squander it.
Yeah, anything with Asian actors and Hollywood, I tend to avoid. I think.
I was going to say that the exception to the rule so far has been Chad Stahelski when he got in the Yahya Rahan and I've forgotten his name, but from the Raid 2, because he knows how to utilize martial arts stars from the Raid, and also, you know, obviously Gareth Evans. Well, he's making Eastern, as a Westerner, he's making Eastern films, but he knows what to do with them. But yeah, Iko Uwais is another one who's been wasted in films like Stuba and Mile 22, and the Skyline films are okay, but again, it's another martial arts star where you're like, you don't know what to do with him, like Tony Jaa in Fast 7. It's like, he's there, he's good, he's not in it much. It's kind of like Donnie Yen. Donnie Yen, I feel, they know what they want him to do, whether it's the stoic leader in Mulan, or like the Jedi, or the Force-sensitive monk in Rogue One, and whatever he's going to do in John Wick 4. But I feel that Donnie Yen's got the edge because I think he was raised in America. I think he lived in Boston from the age of like 5 till 18. So I think that might have kind of given him the edge that someone like Tony Jaa and Iko Uwais don't have, that he can speak the language very well, even if he's in Blade 2 and has no lines.
Yeah, Colin just made a comment there saying that Tony Jaa has been wasted. I agree. I've heard, I haven't seen it, but I've heard he's wasted in that new movie Monster Hunter.
I haven't seen it yet, but I can believe it. I was surprised actually how much he had to do and how funny he was in The Return of Xander Cage. Him and Donnie Yen, they actually had quite a lot to do in that. And that was much more fun than I was expecting. My hopes were not high for a XXX sequel, God knows how many years later. But that was really fun. And I remember Donnie Yen and Tony Jaa having a lot to do, but I could be mistaken. That I could have rose-tinted glasses on. Yeah, it's a very strange phenomenon, the whole, you know, guess who's big? Iko Uwais, let's put him in our film, and we will not lock the camera off, and we will cut every 2 seconds so you can't see what this man is capable of. I don't understand why you go to that effort.
I think John Wick 4 and any John Wick movie that does cast any of these actors will bring out the best in them, because people know what they're doing with these actors, you know, whereas they're not just casting a name and then being like, just go and kick over there and we'll sort of somehow screw up your talent in a major way.
Yeah, and I think there's been a lot of that discussion recently with Mortal Kombat and Snake Eyes. And I haven't seen Snake Eyes yet, but I'm a big fan of Andrew Koji from the Warrior series, and I'm sure David Leitch will use him very well in Bullet Train. I'm sure we'll get him see him unleashed. But by all accounts, he and whatever training Henry Golding might have put in for Snake Eyes is diluted through the editing. And I read a lot of backlash against Mortal Kombat, but I thought the fights were okay, were pretty well shot. You could at least see the fights. And sure, it wasn't like it was 87-11 panning it out, but I thought compared to some of the messes that you've seen, I thought Mortal Kombat was pretty solid in terms of its fight choreography. But I know that got a major backlash against it.
I've yet to still watch Mortal Kombat. Got a copy sent to me. Haven't got out the cellophane yet.
It's very enjoyable. It's very silly. But Lewis Tan, who I liked in Wu Assassins, clearly put the work in. Hiroyuki Sadana is always great. Max Huang, who's part of the Jackie Chan stunt team, he's great in it. Ludi Lun, I thought it was very enjoyable. I'm sure the fights could have been better shot and better choreographed, but I was expecting it to be an absolute mess, and I was surprisingly entertained.
Joe Taslim is in it as well, isn't he?
Joe Taslim is in it as Sub-Zero, and yeah, watching him and Andrew Koji in Warrior, the fights in that are incredible. And Joe Taslim, actually, he's another one that ended up in a Fast and Furious film, and I think they had that one scene where he's beating up Tyrese in the London Underground, and that was fun. But I get the impression, it was Scott Adkins' Art of Action series, where he's like, oh no, we literally had 4 hours to do that. He did not give us nearly enough time. It's like 4 hours. We didn't have any choreography sorted out. We had to do it on the day. And it's incredible that, you get someone like Joe Taslim in, and it's like, just, send him off to do whatever he wants to do.
It's amazing that a film like that only gives them such little time to prep a fight scene.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is something that Scott Adkins has been very vocal about in some of the bigger films that he's been in. And you need, a director like David Leitch or Chad Stahelski that know what makes a fight scene look good and are willing to kind of put the work and effort in, and bringing it back to kind of Lethal Weapon 4, because we've gone way off.
Yeah.
Here. As much as I love Richard Donner, and I'm wearing a Goonies t-shirt, and I love that man and some of the films that he's made, he's probably not the right guy to showcase the skills of Jet Li.
Yeah.
He does that. I remember Lethal Weapon. He does that very far away shot where it's like Jet Li beating up Riggs and Murtaugh, and you can tell it's not really Riggs and Murtaugh because they're all in shadow, because whatever Jet Li's doing is far too fast for like Mel Gibson and Danny Glover to deal with. But yeah, I actually, when I spoke to Al Leon, despite him being in Lethal Weapon 1, he said he worked on Lethal Weapon 4, and he was meant to have a fight scene with Danny Glover because he was playing a random triad in that scene where they take over his house. But he was like, the focus was all on Jet Li, so they couldn't have another martial artist, fighting. Yeah, basically it was like Jet Li doing everything, and they couldn't have someone else doing something because it would detract from the magic that is Jet Li. But he was like, no, we put a lot of work into me beating up Danny Glover, but in the end it was like, no, we'll just watch Jet Li, because otherwise it doesn't make him look as good if all the other martial artists are flooring our heroes. So
the one thing as well that, as we're on Lethal Weapon 4, made it good was Riggs and Murtaugh have aged.
Yeah.
Riggs got, if I remember correctly, he gets his ass kicked in the ring and has to fake his shoulder coming out.
Yeah. And it's all, it actually ends with kind of like, it's all about family, like Fast and Furious. Him and Lorna are having a kid. And Murtaugh's about to become a grandfather. For a man that was meant to retire like 10 years ago, I still don't understand what he's doing on the police force. So it's the one thing I like about Lethal. Well, actually, I do like a lot of things about Lethal Weapon. I'm not as down on it as some people. Is that they recognize what the franchise has become, and that is a group of friends making films together. And they even end the film with, over the credits, it's just kind of like the cast and crew all kind of bonding, and it's just a sense of family, and that's kind of great. I like that. So when I was hearing all these stories before Richard Donner died, where it's like, oh no, we're definitely working on Lethal Weapon 5, it's like, why? Both these characters would have retired a decade ago now. What's it going to be? A family drama? Like they're both retired and some bad guy comes out of the shadows to threaten their families. It's like, we don't want to see kids getting threatened again, and grandkids at this point. It's like, and I think that's kind of why Lethal Weapon kind of ends it on a nice note. It's like the Lethal Weapon is now a family man. You can just leave it there. They are both happy together with their respective families. They found a peaceful way of life. It's a good place to end it, to end the franchise. It might not be to everyone's taste, and it's not the best film in the franchise, but it's a nice place to put a full stop.
It's a bookend.
Yeah, it's a good bookend. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. I thought Lethal Weapon 4 did round the series off really well. So I was surprised when they said they were going to do a fifth one, especially after, what is that now? That's 98. No, that's
23 years.
23 years. Like,
so even Riggs's son might be a police officer, and that's the only thing I can see them doing. It's like Riggs Jr., maybe Murtaugh's grandson, and they, that kind of cynical bullshit where it's like, it's the grandsons of Riggs and Murtaugh, and they don't like each other, but they got to work together on a case. It's like when Tom
won't be a lethal weapon this time.
Yeah. Murtaugh's son's. Oh god. It's like when Tom Clancy basically gave Jack Ryan a son called Jack Ryan, so he could just keep writing more Jack Ryan books. But the older Jack Ryan's now president of the United States, and his son can do all the spy shit. It's like, you lazy fucker. Just wrap it up. Just wrap it up. We don't need Jack Ryan Jr. You've got to know when to put a full stop on things. So, yeah.
But Lethal Weapon 4, for people that haven't seen it, it's a fun movie. There's nothing bad about it whatsoever.
No, it's nowhere near as its detractors would have you make. It's perfectly fine and fun, but any hard edges that the franchise had at the beginning have been thoroughly rounded and sanded off by this point. But it kind of makes sense with where the characters have gone. You wouldn't expect Mel Gibson to still be an unstable psychopath. Well, in the fictional world of Lethal Weapon, whatever he does in his own public life is out there. So, yeah, I mean, Lethal Weapon 4 does get a fair amount of kicking, but I would not say it's not entirely justified. It does suffer from we've got an awesome Eastern action star and we're not entirely sure what to do with him. But that is not uncommon in those films in the late 90s.
And it features some good action scenes. The freeway chase was pretty fun to watch.
That's very, very fun. Yeah, in the home on the back of the truck getting dragged along. Yeah, that's again another great action scene. Yeah, love it.
And then some people hate this, but I love it. The banter between Detective Butters and Leo Getz.
I mean, I like Chris Rock, but it is of that ilk where they're like, hey, we've got a young comedian who's really hot right now. Let's put him in something like, putting Pete Davidson in loads of stuff because he's really good on Saturday Night Live. And it can sometimes work and it can sometimes not work. And I'm not 100% sure it entirely works in Lethal Weapon 4. And I like Chris Rock. He's great. But you do, when he's kind of doing, Leo Getz thinks he's a criminal in the back of the police car. You just feel like they're like, right, Chris, do some sort of shtick about black people always being mistaken for criminals and roll the camera. This is just the Chris Rock hour. It's kind of like when Paul Feig just lets the camera roll on various comedians he's got just improving constantly in scenes, and Judd Apatow does it. It's like, mate, sometimes you just need a tight script, and I'm all for a bit of improv, but you guys have been improving for 5 minutes now. Let's wrap it up and cut to the next scene. Sometimes you just need to kind of like, brevity is the soul of wit.
And to wrap up Lethal Weapon 4, it does feature an explosive finale. And what was your take on Riggs and Murtaugh, or Stuntman and Stuntman, versus Jet Li?
I mean, you got to make them win somehow, and it's with a machine gun. It's a weird thing. It is, yeah. I mean, you've got to somehow make a convincing ending that these two men in their 50s can beat a very fast Jet Li, and in the end, they kind of do it by cheating. So
spoiler alert.
But hey, no, that's probably what you would need to do to survive. I mean, yeah, it's like, well, you've made Jet Li your bad guy. How are you going to beat him? Because there's no way these guys can beat him in hand-to-hand combat. You might get a good old haymaker in once, but he's so fast. So I don't know. I don't. It's not a satisfying ending. But then I would need a lot more time to think about how you make it a satisfying ending if you made Jet Li your bad guy and we've still got Riggs and Murtaugh. I mean, you can make Butters, like you could have got Michael Jai White in as Butters, maybe instead of Chris Rock. And he's like, the reason he doesn't want to tell Murtaugh that, he's going to be his son-in-law is because he's a member of the SWAT team and he goes into all the dangerous situations, and that's why he's trained in hand-to-hand combat, and only he can beat Jet Li at the end. But they didn't cast Michael Jai White as Butters. But you'd have to kind of explain away and have your heroes realize that at the end of the day they cannot keep up with bad guys, and then they retire, and then you can do a Lethal Weapon 5 with Michael Jai White as the new
Lethal Weapon.
Yeah, a new Lethal Weapon. And yeah, exactly. There you go. That's how I would have ended Lethal Weapon 4, and I've just come up with that in like 20 seconds. But it is what it is, and I get what they were trying to do. It's not entirely satisfying to anyone that's a fan of Jet Li, but arguably Lethal Weapon 4 probably isn't made for fans of Jet Li. It's for your dad who liked Lethal Weapon and Lethal Weapon 2, and might have seen that Jet Li in something before, but doesn't really know his name, and isn't he good at kicking?
Probably calls him Jackie Chan.
Yeah, is that Jackie Chan? No, Mum, that's not Jackie. Oh, forget it. Doesn't matter.
And then we touched upon it briefly before we wrap up Lethal Weapon 5. So they announced it, but then sadly Richard Donner had passed.
Yeah. And
then there was word of maybe Mel Gibson directing it, but that was from mouth of
Mel Gibson. I would be very surprised if it goes ahead. Basically, they rebooted it on TV to, it ran for 3 seasons. But I don't think Mel Gibson has the clout to do that anymore. And also, because of his anti-Semitic comments, Warner Brothers is traditionally, the Warner Brothers were the only studio in Hollywood that didn't really kowtow down to Germany during the 30s, because the Warner Brothers were Jewish immigrants. So during the 1930s, it was like every other studio was like, oh no, we need to get our films into Nazi Germany. We need to make that money somehow. And Warner Brothers were the only ones that were like, fuck Hitler and fuck those guys. So if suddenly Warner Brothers are like, hey, Mel Gibson, come along and reboot Lethal Weapon, I'd be very surprised. However, it's still Hollywood and money needs to be made. But no, I don't think Lethal Weapon 5 is ever going to happen at this point. It would be the most cynical of cash-ins, and I think even the most diehard Lethal Weapon fan at this point would be kind of like, really? I mean, think of all the Lethal Weapon inspired knockoffs, if you will. For example, Rush Hour. Jackie and Chris Tucker every now and then. Well, basically, it's more Brett Ratner beating this drum, and that's because that man can't get anything made these days. He's like, there will definitely be a Rush Hour 4. It's like, does anyone really want to see Rush Hour 4 at this point? Especially after
Lethal Weapon TV series failed.
Yeah, they had a TV series and that failed, and no one really liked Lethal Rush Hour 3.
No.
I mean, the mold of the mismatched cop pairing is so simple to do. I understand studios are lazy and they'll always go with an intellectual property or a brand that they could market. But I feel, Lethal Weapon and Rush Hour, they may have been run into the ground. You know what you could do? Showdown in Little Tokyo. Bring that back. You get a big Nordic type. You get a big martial arts type. I love that. Dolph Lundgren and Brandon Lee, I think of all the Lethal Weapon spin-offs or, rip-offs, that is one that doesn't get enough love. I love Showdown in Little Tokyo.
If they were going to recast that, who would your leads be? In 20 seconds.
20 seconds. Oh, Jesus. Daniel Wu and Joel Kinnaman.
Very good combo.
I'm just like, who's big and blonde? Who's a good martial artist that's quite quippy? Or Simu Liu. I like Simu Liu. Shang-Chi. I'm a big fan of Kim's Convenience. He'd be good. I don't know. Yeah. But instead of remaking things that are that did well, Showdown in Little Tokyo was arguably a flop. It's a cult hit. Remake that, because I don't think anyone would give a shit. I love Showdown in Little Tokyo, and if someone's like, they're remaking Showdown in Little Tokyo, we're like, awesome. I'd watch that.
Because you can't go wrong with the formula.
You can't cock it up. I mean, Showdown in Little Tokyo is really weird because you have Brandon Lee for half the film congratulating Dolph Lundgren on the size of his penis. And you're like, what? This is very odd, but okay.
It's a film that works.
It's a film that works. There are a lot of things that dated. It's definitely from that time in Hollywood history where they're like, hey, you know what's cool? The Yakuza. And Tia Carrera's character isn't she raped at the beginning of the film? And then
I think so, halfway through or something, maybe?
Halfway through, and then by the midway point, she's like, hey, Dolph Lundgren, take me to bed. And you're like, that's not great. So, instead of Lethal Weapon 5, I'd like, why not reboot Showdown in Little Tokyo? Take an IP that could do with a bit of resurrection. Stop remaking things that were already successful. Try the things that weren't.
And you have to keep the whole penis references in it. That's what Showdown in Little Tokyo is about.
Just congratulating Dolph Lundgren on the size of his penis.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. Do it.
I bet you it was like the katana and the shadows that you see. That was him just pulling up his trousers, getting ready to go.
If anything, it kind of... When I interviewed Ty Ma, he was like, Hollywood always thinks Asian people are asexual. They can't be hot or sexy. And Brandon Lee in Showdown in Little Tokyo is incredibly hot and sexy. So it's weird that Brandon Lee is congratulating the very stoic, not charming at all Dolph Lundgren on the size of his penis when you got Brandon Lee, who's just slick and oiled up and flipping over stuff. It kind of does underline that thing where it's like, well, Asian people can't be hot. What are you talking about? It's so maybe reverse that. Have Joel Kinnaman congratulating Daniel Wu on the firmness of his buttocks or something. I don't know.
So with Daniel Wu's buttocks and Dolph Lundgren's penis and a lethal weapon, I think it's safe to say we've covered all bases.
It all comes together perfectly.
Ty, it was amazing speaking to you.
Oh, no, thanks, Jeff. I mean, I can't have these conversations with my wife. Actually, no, I can discuss the sexiness of Brandon Lee with my wife, she's more than happy to engage with that.
Anything Lethal Weapon, though, they don't want to know.
She is a big fan of Lethal Weapon films, but probably just not to this extent.
Well, Ty, I appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much.
Oh, no problem. This was great fun.
Thank you, Ty. See you later, mate.
Okay, bye.
Bye.